McDougal.
And he is in for a Jets touchdown.
That's over the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown.
There goes Darnold. And Bell! He's doing it all for the Jets.
And welcome back to another episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We're your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. Training camp is underway, and Michael and I figured we'd break down the first few days of action. But first, Michael, how you doing, man?
It's good to finally see some tweets about what's going on in the head-to-head drills and practice. We can react to all of these ridiculously and make these breakout predictions because, Blake Cashman makes one tackle in the flat. He's going to the Pro Bowl because of that. So it's officially overreaction season, and it's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure what Adam Gase is doing to these guys because they seem to be dropping like flies the first few days of training camp, partially because maybe it's no OTAs, time off. There's always training camp injuries, but not a great start given that Denzel Mims is out for a little bit with a hamstring. Connor Hughes said that he should be back within the week. Pierre Desir still out. Brian Poole had dehydration, and he's missed 2 or 3 days now. Cameron Clark's week to week with a shoulder. I think Bird just got hurt today. So, I don't necessarily know what's going on in Florham Park, but the injury bug seems to have bitten the Jets a little bit early. But, all those guys seem like they should be back by the time the season starts. And as long as – well, I'm not even going to say it. I'm not going to try to jinx anything. But I guess the big news of this week was the Jets signing Chris Hogan, veteran receiver mostly known for his time with the New England Patriots, was with the Buffalo Bills. Last year was with the Carolina Panthers. A bit of an older option. Didn't have a great year last year, but he does know the offense. Michael – what are your thoughts on Chris Hogan and what he can bring to this offense outside of depth at the receiver spot?
Well, I think it was key for them to add some depth at some point. Demaryius Thomas is a name we've been bringing up throughout the offseason, and I think he probably still is on the table. You'd think from Thomas's perspective, he's in a position where, if the Jets do want him, he can probably sit out most of training camp and then just sign with the team before the season because of the extended experience he has with Adam Gase, both last year and in Denver. So I think that option still is on the table because they're really lacking in depth still with the Hogan signing. But the experience Hogan brings, I think, is really important because before you brought him in, the Jets only had 2 wide receivers on the team with more than 1 career touchdown catch, and that's Perriman and Crowder. The only 2 to catch at least one were Vincent Smith and Josh Malone, and both of them have 1 touchdown each. So not a lot of experience and reliability at the outside wide receiver position. So to get Hogan, who does have some experience, is pretty solid. Did not have a good season last year at all. Missed 9 games with a knee injury. When he was out there, he averaged 10 yards per game on 4.5 yards per target. So he struggled with the Panthers last year. But with the Patriots, he was a really solid filled that role that he probably might with the Jets, that at least to start, he could be the 3 or 4 receiver. But he filled that role pretty well with the Patriots. In 2016, he led the league qualified players in yards per reception with 17.9. And from 2014 to 2018, he did average really solid numbers in terms of big plays, 8.7 yards per target, 13.7 per reception, and 18 touchdowns. So about 4 touchdowns per 16 games. And for a wide receiver 3 or 4, those are pretty solid numbers. Of his 22 career touchdowns, including the playoffs, 10 of those were from at least 20 yards out. So he gives you that deep threat. He's also known as a solid blocker, which is, as we've talked about, very important for this team. They did not get much blocking from any position, receiver, tight end, obviously the O-line. So to get that will be a nice little boost as well. But the experience is what I think is most important. They don't have a lot of reliability at this position. So to get a veteran who can be just an okay 3rd or 4th receiver, give you some big play production as a deep threat, I think is a nice little boost. And with the injuries at wide receiver, he could be the wide receiver 3 in week 1 behind Perriman and Crowder, depending on how well Denzel Mims heals up. I think long-term, or at least throughout the season, he'll probably be competing with Vincent Smith for that wide receiver 4 spot, with Mims up there with Perriman competing for the second spot behind Crowder. But at least for now, it seems like Hogan could be, playing decent snaps in week 1, depending on how Mims heals up, and also Vincent Smith as well, who's been hurting throughout the first few practices. So I think it's a nice add for depth and experience.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Smith with that core injury. You mentioned Demaryius Thomas. Are you surprised that they didn't go with Demaryius like we all expected instead of Chris Hogan? We expected they were probably going to bring in a vet. I know you mentioned he's still on the table, especially throughout the season. If somebody goes down, I would expect ET to get a call. But I think me and you both kind of assumed that in the next few weeks they were going to bring back Demaryius. Adam Gase says he has experience in the offense. I'm not actually quite sure where, though. I was looking at Chris Hogan. I mean, I don't know when he overlapped with Adam Gase, so I'm kind of curious about that. But are you surprised they didn't go with Demaryius? Was this a bit of a shock to you? And if you had to choose, who would you go with based off of what you expect from them in 2020?
I mean, I'd probably go with Thomas. I mean, we know he's way past his prime at this point. He's going to be 33 years old in December. But, I mean, Hogan's about the same age, and I think Thomas definitely has a lot more to offer, even at this stage of his career, than Hogan does, and he has a lot more experience. I know what you said, that Gase did bring that up in terms of Hogan, but like you said, he never played for Adam Gase, at least in the regular season. So Thomas, though, has tons of experience under Gase. And last year, even though he did have some drops and wasn't necessarily the most dynamic receiver, I think what Thomas did well last year is just going back to that understanding of the offense, plays where he had to, time his cut over the middle to coincide with a pick by one of his teammates. He also, in the red zone, made that nice jump ball catch against Miami in Week 14. So plays where timing was involved, I think he did a really good job with. So I think he definitely has more to offer than Hogan does. So I would still bring Thomas in at some point in the offseason over the next couple weeks. I was surprised definitely that they went with Hogan over Thomas, but we don't know what Thomas's situation is. There's a lot of uncertainty with a lot of players around the league right now with everything that has been going on here in 2020. So we don't know if he wants to play for the Jets, but I think he would definitely be a better option. I would still bring him in at this point, but Chris Hogan is better than nothing, I think, especially with the injuries at receiver. So I would like to see them sign Thomas at some point, though.
Right. I think for me, I think the best case scenario is Chris Hogan being the fifth string receiver because
Right.
I did like what Vincent Smith showed in limited action last year. It's kind of weird to think about because I always kind of thought of him as just some scrub in the team, but he started quite a few games for the Jets last year. So he is a returning starter in a way. And he's young and he obviously has that speed. So I think the hope is that Vincent Smith can take that fourth string wide receiver spot and Hogan is pretty much depth and veteran presence. But statistically, what are you expecting from Chris Hogan? I guess what's the ceiling and what's the floor? Obviously, it depends, who gets hurt. If he moves up into that number 2 receiver spot, all of a sudden it's week 8 and Denzel Mims and Vincent Smith are out or whatever, or God forbid the number 1 spot. But statistically, what type of year do you think Chris Hogan will have if you had to predict it?
Well, I think, like you said, that ideally he's your 5th wide receiver. I don't think if the Jets have 33-year-old Chris Hogan as their 3rd wide receiver, then things aren't going well in terms of the health at the position with Mims and Smith. And like you said, Vincent Smith finished the season pretty impressively. He started off as like you said, just one of those scrubs on the roster and on a team that was very decimated by injuries. But he finished off pretty nicely and filling that role that we hope he will this season as the 4th wide receiver pretty well, making the most of the few targets that he got. So I'd like to see Smith get that 4th wide receiver spot. So for Hogan, I think, again, ideally, hopefully he doesn't get the ball thrown his way that much. But if he can give you 1 or 2 deep bomb touchdowns this season, catch maybe out of his 20 targets, catch 12 of those for, 160 yards, something like that. I guess that's the most you could realistically hope for, but hopefully he doesn't have to actually play that much.
Right. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at 5 camp studs over the first few days and just talk about them. Michael can give, again, a statistical expectation for them in 2020. Just talk about their impact. And we'll start with Chris Herndon, who missed pretty much all of 2019 outside of, I think it was 7 snaps or 9 snaps. Had a great end of 2018 with Sam Darnold. You've talked about the numbers he had as a rookie, really put him in the upper echelon as far as rookie tight ends go. So obviously the hype was huge last year. It seems like it may have gone even up even more this year, just because it seems like the Jets will be relying on their tight ends a lot, given how thin they are at receiver. He has that chemistry with Darnold, which only Crowder really has at this point. So Michael, apparently he's been impressing. Connor Hughes thinks that if he can stay healthy, he's going to have a huge year. What are you expecting from Chris Herndon in 2020, and how much would it mean to this offense if he can be what we all thought he was going to be last year?
Well, I think the biggest thing with Herndon is that his production as a rookie really set him up for a big leap in 2019 in his second season. You compare him to some of the rookie tight ends who have done the things that he did, produce as much as he did, as young as he was, and doing it efficiently in terms of his yards per target. Those guys generally have gone on to have big second-year leaps. You're putting him in the company of guys like Hunter Henry, Mark Andrews, and even Rob Gronkowski. And those guys had similar rookie years in terms of those factors I just mentioned, and then improved quite a bit in their second season. So he was in position to have a big leap, and now things are a little bit different because, he's missed the whole season, so it's not truly his second year in the league. And also there's another guy at the tight end position, and Ryan Griffin, who played well last year and is going to be demanding some targets. So I think that, considering how Griffin played last year, I think this is going to be a committee approach between these two guys. I think they are going to combine to be one of the most productive receiving tight end duos in the league. And that's going to be not split, definitely favoring Herndon. But I think Griffin will hold Herndon's total production back a little bit, but not in a bad way, because Griffin is going to be a solid, form a solid 1-2 punch with Herndon. So I wrote an article on Jets X Factor predicting both of their stat lines. What I predicted for Herndon is 50 catches on 70 targets for 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. And that would be over 16 games. And that would be pretty solid if you put that next to what I predicted for Griffin, which is slightly less than that. For Griffin, I predicted 40 catches, 400 yards, 4 touchdowns. If you can get that from both of those guys, then that's a combined almost 10 touchdowns and 1,000 yards. That's one of the best receiving tight end duos in the league. So I don't think Herndon's going to put up the biggest volume numbers because Griffin is there. But together, I think these two guys are going to be really efficient and have great camaraderie with Darnold. And they'll be one of the best receiving duos in the league at tight end.
Yeah, we can only hope. And we've seen how Darnold really likes the tight end, because Ryan Griffin was kind of a signing that went under the radar in August. I mean, he was a tight end with starting experience. But by October, November, he earned himself an extension in November, I believe. Sam Darnold clearly relied on him. It went Crowder number 1, and then it went seems like Griffin number 2, and then Robbie 3. So he clearly loves that tight end spot, and to have 2 really solid tight ends. And, maybe we get more receiving from Wesco this year. I expect him to be more of the blocker H-back. But yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of 12 personnel this year as Gase tries to mask the weaknesses at receiver by putting more tight ends and more running backs on the field. Speaking of that receiver position, Breshad Perriman is another guy that's received some high praise so far in the first few days. Caught a 50-yard touchdown from Sam. Adam Gase praised him for showing up, knowing the entire playbook, not having pretty much any questions, knows where to line up. We've already talked about the end of his 2019 year, how amazing that was. But it's consistency. Can he keep that going? Is that a sign of things to come, or was that just a flash in the pan? But very low drop rate, was catching a ton of touchdowns, became Jameis Winston's number 1 option with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans out. So really did show in those last few games that if that he could be a number 1 receiver if that stretch was true. Michael, what are your thoughts on Breshad Perriman? Obviously, the Jets need somebody on the outside to step up. I'm hoping it's going to be Denzel Mims, because I think he's going to be the long-term answer. Hopefully the long-term 1, maybe the long-term 2. But hey, Perriman's still relatively young. If he has a great year this year, he'll definitely be brought back. So what are your thoughts on Perriman's statistical expectation, thoughts on him in training camp so far, and building that chemistry with Sam?
Well, I think it's really promising that he's been one of the guys who have generated the most hype throughout training camp. And obviously we don't want to put too much stock into it. A lot of the players who get hyped in camp, it really turns out to look ridiculous in hindsight. If we actually went back and looked through all the players who've been hyped up in training camp, we'd see a lot of ridiculous see things turn out a lot different than we expected them to. But it's good to see this with Perriman, especially with the injuries at receiver. But he is one of the toughest projections on the roster, because we've seen everything from him. What he did in December, he was one of the best receivers in the league, second in receiving yards, tied for first in touchdowns. and especially the last 3 games. Those were the first 3 games of his career in which he played over 85% of the offensive snaps, and he went over 100 yards in each game. So for the first time was a featured option, and he dominated in the role. But those were only 3 games out of the 51 he's played in his career. And before December of last year, he had never even caught 5 passes in a game over his first 46 career appearances. So the ceiling is as high as it can get. The floor is very, very low. In the games where, before December of last year, in the games where he played at least 60% of the offensive snaps, he averaged about 10 receiving yards a game. So he was very quiet until December of last year. So ceiling's very high, floor's really low. He could really fall anywhere in there. So it's good to see that he's building that chemistry with Darnold right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And you know, I think I'm more bullish on Perriman than you have been to this point. Connor Hughes noted that the biggest difference you're going to see between him and Robbie is more effort. I do think his ceiling in this offense is higher than Robbie's, but I would say his floor is probably lower, considering that Robbie has the chemistry with Sam, and you know he's going to bring that deep route or that deep speed regardless. The next player, Ashtyn Davis, who is going viral a little bit today with his backflip jug machine catch, which is fairly impressive. Also had a nice play displaying his range, running across the field. I think, as we've noted, I think Greg's going to play a lot of 3 safety sets. I think in dime packages, Davis is probably going to be that slot corner, that second slot corner, and in addition to Brian Poole. I think you're going to see Ashtyn Davis on the field a lot, in addition to special teams. It was a pick that was a bit of a head scratcher for some, because I think people were looking at, well, are they going to take another receiver? Are they going to go edge? And to take a safety was a bit of a head scratcher, considering Jamal Adams was still on the team. But we noted that we thought they might because, one, Greg loves the 3 safety packages. With Ashtyn Davis, that's a guy that many people thought could have gone at the end of the first, at the very least a second round pick. And then 3, obviously, with Jamal Adams being traded, now it looks great because now they have a future right there at the safety position between him and May. Michael, what are your thoughts on Ashtyn Davis? I know you're a guy who thinks that he may struggle a little bit more in his rookie year. Kind of why is that, and what are your expectations for Davis, and what's the best case scenario, I guess, for him this year?
Well, if they use him right, I think he can definitely make an impact in his first season. I think it's more of the fact that I think there were a lot of people who kind of expected him to maybe, especially if they traded Adams, to just come right in and start and instantly be great. I definitely don't think he's that kind of player. I think there are some things he has to work out with a lot of things in coverage, man-to-man, and also in the box, defending the run. Joe Blewett broke it down really well with his film at JetX. But if Greg puts him in the right positions, which is going to be a lot easier now since they did pick up Bradley McDougald in the Adams trade, so they don't have to rely on Ashtyn Davis to play a starting role. If they use him correctly, put him in spots where he can thrive, here and there, maybe in cover 2, if you just put him in the slot and blitz him off the edge, things like that, where he doesn't have to think too much and can just use his speed. And also he does have to think, if he's playing cover 2 deep safety, but that's something he's good at. So for the most part, just if you can put him in roles situationally, not too many snaps where he can thrive, I think he can definitely make an impact as that third safety right away. But in terms of being a long-term starter and also where he fits in, because his strengths are kind of similar to May's in terms of being a deep safety. So where he fits in long-term, that's a question mark that we're going to have answered over the course of this season and also the next few seasons. And he also, does have to, prove he can be a guy who can play every single snap at safety. But in terms of this year, I think he can make an impact as long as they keep his load light and also make sure his roles are roles he can thrive in right off the bat without, having rookie mini camp or too much practice time throughout the season to really get acclimated in the defense. Because physically, we know what he brings to the table, pure speed that a lot of players in the league just don't have. So as long as you can maximize that and not risk him blowing coverages because of his lack of experience, getting toasted man-to-man because he has work to do in that phase, if you can maximize what he does well in a small sample size, I think he can make an impact as that third safety this year.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for Ashtyn is he's got to change his number to 33 because the 33 is much cleaner than the 32. But, if he does that.
And so if we did that, we'd have two of our headline players from last year, Robbie and Jamal, having their young replacement come in and take their number.
Yeah, I mean, I think if he switches to 33, I'm putting a Pro Bowl season on deck. If he stays in 32 territory, though, I don't know about him. He might be a bust.
33 just feels faster. 2 kind of, I don't know what it is, but the 2 just kind of makes you feel more stagnant, not quite as fast.
Well, maybe he can develop that jersey. If he becomes a great player, then maybe 32 will slowly become a better jersey in my mind. 2 more players, Mekhi Becton, who, I mean, I think Connor Hughes had the joke that every time you see a player say Mekhi Becton is big, you can take a drink, because that's no pun intended, the biggest thing that I've seen on Twitter is just how large of a human Mekhi Becton is. But also he's had a nice few plays. He told Frank Gore that he's going to get him 4 yards every play. Just got to follow him. Seems to be confident. A lot of players are raving about him. The coaches are raving about him. Adam Gase shot down immediately that there was any sort of swimming period for Mekhi where he's just trying to survive. He says that he looks very comfortable. And that would be huge. I think he did get blown up on a pass play in day 1 or something. But the big thing, and it's not just for Mekhi, is the chemistry that this unit's going to have to develop in a few weeks. It's hopefully one of those things that's just getting better every single day as they develop that chemistry. But Michael, your thoughts on Mekhi Becton? Obviously, the Jets' first-round draft pick. If he could step up, that would be absolutely massive. And the line as a whole was the Jets' biggest weakness last year. So, your thoughts on Mekhi Becton and the line as a whole? When we talk about statistical expectations, it's probably easier to do line unit rankings instead of just Mekhi. So, what are your expectations for the offensive line this year?
Yeah, I think it is. Becton is another guy who it's really important to see him generating some positive hype throughout practice. And I think, if he was struggling, I think, the reports would be out there. It's easy to see if he's getting beaten pretty badly in one-on-one reps. So apparently he hasn't been, and he has stood out in a positive way. So that's very important. He's probably the biggest variable on this team this year in terms of the effect that he has on the entire on the fortunes of the entire team, because, if he struggles off the bat, which is okay because a lot of future star tackles have rough rookie seasons. If he struggles off the bat, then the ceiling of this line is going to be limited quite a bit because how important left tackle is. But if he can start off quickly, which, again, a lot of star tackles do immediately come in and play well. We've seen a lot of examples of that recently. Ryan Ramczyk, Jack Conklin, Ronnie Stanley, just a few examples of guys who have come right in and played well. If he can do that, then I think that that really raises the ceiling of the entire offensive line. If you have a great left tackle immediately out of Becton, and then with some of the other additions they made, including McGovern, Van Roten, then that offensive line's floor goes up quite a bit. So if he can come right in and play at a solid level, at least, it does so much for this entire team because of how important that offensive line is to Sam Darnold, to Le'Veon Bell, to everything. So, and that all starts with Becton. So he's really important. To see him generating some positive buzz is great. And it's just practice. They just put the pads on today. It means absolutely nothing, but it definitely beats them talking negatively about him. So hopefully this does carry over into the season because he is the most important player on the team this year, right off the bat in his rookie year. And that doesn't mean, if he plays poorly, it doesn't mean his career is over. He could still become great. Like I said, a lot of rookies, don't play well. That's not the expectation for them to play well. You give everybody that 1 year to figure things out. But if he can play well, it's going to do a lot for this team.
Right. Who are you most worried about on that offensive line? Between Becton, Alex Lewis, Connor McGovern, Greg Van Roten.
I think it's either probably George Fant. I think that's definitely the worry. There's definitely some potential there. You consider how athletic he is and the fact that even though he's 28 years old, he hasn't started that much in the league. He's had only of all the games he's played, most of them he's been a sixth lineman or come in as a backup. He's only had 18 games where he's actually started and played the entire game at one of those tackle spots, and 13 of those were as a rookie. So over the last 3 seasons, he's only had 5 true start and finish games at tackle. So he has barely any experience at all, and he has all that athleticism. So there's a lot of untapped potential there. But the fact of the matter is, when he has played to this point, he's given up a lot of pressure, more than most tackles in the league. He was bottom 10 last year in terms of pressure rate. So that's worrisome, but there's potential there. And the fact that Joe Douglas was willing to fill a crucial hole, giving Fant almost $14 million guaranteed, in spite of his lack of experience, that gives you the confidence that Douglas and the scouting department saw quite a bit in him, and see him as a player they can work with and get the most out of him and get an improved season out of him. So that gives you some confidence, the fact that they were willing to invest in him, but it is a risk. So I think Fant does have easily the lowest floor of any of the 5 players on the O-line.
Right.
Lewis is a little bit not worrying, but I just think his ceiling, he doesn't have a high ceiling. I think in terms of the run game, he's not going to create a ridiculous amount of push there, but in pass protection, I think he does an okay job. So a respectable floor, but his ceiling is definitely his most limited ceiling of the 5, I think. But Fant definitely has the lowest floor.
Right. That's a good point you brought up about George Fant's contract. I will say that the Jets can get out of that contract very easily.
Right.
Would you guess, make your prediction on who's the starting right tackle week 17? Is it Chuma, Adoga, or is it George Fant? Because Chuma's a guy that has been relatively overlooked the last few months that nobody's really talking about. But if he could step up as the right tackle of the future, I guess, or George Fant, but considering Chuma was a 3rd-round draft pick last year, that would help Joe Douglas out tremendously. Had an up and down rookie season as you'd expect from a mid-round tackle. Really struggled at left tackle, but had some promise at right tackle, specifically in that Raiders game before he got hurt. So who would you predict to be the starting right tackle? Do you think George Fant is going to come through on what Joe Douglas thinks he might be able to, or do you think Chuma Adoga will surprise?
Yeah, I remember early in the offseason, we were kind of considering that, kind of assuming that it was going to be a competition between Fant and Edoga, but there doesn't seem to be a competition at all. It kind of seems like Fant is locked into that starting spot. So in terms of will he hold on to it throughout the season, I think he will. Does that necessarily mean he'll play well? I'm not sure, but for a guy to be benched, I think he has to play extremely poorly, like some of the linemen we've seen for this team the past few seasons. And I think Fant will do enough in the run game, and I think the unit will be connected enough as a whole, because that's an important part too. Even if one player isn't playing great, if the unit as a whole has good camaraderie, you're running the football well, protection breakdowns are limited, then benching a guy isn't the best move, even if he isn't playing great, because you want to keep that chemistry together. And I think this unit, even though they haven't had the practice time, I think that they will be decent enough to where they won't want to mess with that too much. So I think Fant will, again, health provided, obviously, but I think he will finish the season as the right tackle. And like you said with Edoga, it would have been great to see him develop and seize that spot. It still could be great, if Fant gets injured, if he doesn't play well, because to have a young tackle develop, a young player at any position develop into a good starter and become a cheap long-term option for you, that's how you build championship teams. So it would be great to see that. That's the most ideal path for them. But I do think Fant will finish the season. And will he play well? That's the biggest question. What do you think? Do you think Edoga is going to steal it at some point, or is Fant going to finish it out?
My gut is telling me George Fant, I guess. But, yeah, I mean, like you said, the best case scenario is Edoga. So that's what I'm cheering for. And especially considering George Fant's contract, I would love if the Jets could see something from Chuma Adoga where they don't have to invest a top draft pick in another tackle, and then they can release George Fant and get his cap space back. So yeah, I'm going to go with George Fant, but it's really close for me. And part of that is because of my lack of confidence in George Fant. I think he has shown some fairly high ceilings at times, but like you said, he's had some, fairly bad plays in the NFL. So for him, it's about consistency. Can he be that consistent starter at right tackle? And not, turn into a turnstile. I don't think he's as bad as some fans thought he was when he first got signed. He really does have quite a few pancake blocks and just like Mekhi Becton has the size and the athleticism, which is perfect for Adam Gase's offense. But yeah, I'm going to go with him. But if Chuma could really show anything, that's the best case scenario. I would say it's 60-40.
It's definitely the best case scenario because, like I said earlier, that is how you build a championship team, by developing your own talent, having young players who are on cheap deals, and also they fit in your system, they're established in your culture. And Edoga last year struggled for the most part, but he was one of the youngest tackles in the league. I believe he was the youngest Jets tackle since Marvin Powell in 1977. So he was really young, and he had to switch between the left and the right side because of injuries. He got thrown in earlier than expected because Shell was so bad. So he definitely had to deal with a lot, and he was a rookie anyway, a third-round rookie. But, he showed some potential in the last few starts he made, and he improved throughout his short stint.
It's hard to remember. He's a third-round rookie was quite young and then was just kind of thrown into the spotlight. So the Jets probably shouldn't just give up on him that easily, although he wasn't a Joe Douglas pick, which doesn't help him.
Right.
But, yeah, it's close for me because both those guys are major question marks. I think Fant right now, it's hard for me to say. I almost want to say Chuma. No, I'll say Fant right now.
Yeah,
has the
I think the ideal path is Edoga stealing it at some point because, whatever the reason, but Edoga stealing it and playing well to finish out the season. But most likely you have to go towards the Douglas guy who was George Fant and think that he'll finish out the season. Right.
And if George Fant does finish out the season, I think the Jets will have the two biggest tackles in the entire NFL protecting Sam, which if they can both play well would be quite great. The last player, Quinnen Williams, who has been a bit of a training camp stud throughout the first few days. The Jets are going to need a huge year from him because as you just talked about, finding studs in the NFL draft and being able to play them on cheap contracts is how you win, especially when you take a guy top 3 when you could have traded down. You could have taken Josh Allen. You could have taken Ed Oliver. Quinnen was viewed as, by a lot of people, the best player available. Obviously positional value for interior defensive linemen is fairly low, but if you can create that interior pressure, that's arguably as valuable as edge pressure. Nobody says Quinnen has to be Aaron Donald, but if he can be developed into a player like Chris Jones, who's an amazing player in his own right, but if they can get something from Quinnen where he can be better than the average starter in the NFL, that's why you take a guy in the top 3 is you believe that he has that elite Pro Bowl potential. Had a fairly quiet rookie season, just like Chris Jones did, and a lot of fairly successful interior defensive linemen. I think anybody who plays in the trenches, typically they struggle as a rookie, but Quinnen did have a few flashes. Apparently he was playing hurt all year. He seems to have worked out really hard this offseason. He looks a lot bigger. Or he looks slimmer, but I guess more defined. So Michael, your thoughts on Quinnen Williams? Clearly in the run game, it seems to be where he's really standing out, but if he can generate anything in the pass game, that would help a Jets defense that is just starving for any sort of pressure on the quarterback. So Michael, your thoughts on Quinnen Williams?
Yeah, well, like you said, I think in the run game, he did a good job in the run game. I think he can be more dominant in that phase. He was very solid, but he can be more dominant there. But it's a passing game where the progression needs to come. He was below average there, not terrible. I think he did a lot of off the stat sheet stuff that didn't really get noticed, especially later in the season. The last 4 games that he played, he finished off pretty well in terms of pressures. And also I looked at every single pass rush rep that he had throughout the season in terms of just winning blocks or just winning reps, beating the guy in front of him, regardless of whether it results in a pressure or a sack. He was winning much more frequently down the stretch. The Jets used him in stunts less often, gave him more one-on-one matchups, and with the increased amount of one-on-one matchups, he was winning them more frequently than he was early in the season at a much higher rate than he was. So he improved down the stretch. That was promising, and he has to carry that over this season, especially because they still have no edge rush to rely on at all. So if they're going to create any pressure, it's going to be on Greg Williams to dial up blitzes effectively, and it's going to be on that interior D-line to rack up the pressure. And as you said before, I think that interior pressure is just as valuable as edge pressure, where I think the difference is that I think in the league right now, the talent at the defensive line is a lot deeper than the talent at edge. Right. A lot of teams feel like they have a good group of defensive tackles, but not a lot of teams can say that they have 2 edge rushers that they can feel good about. So right. I think the value of pressure at each position is very similar. And you think of pressure up the middle, it's a lot closer to the quarterback than the edge. That's coming straight into his face. And that's how he scrambles out into a lot of sacks that edge rushers pick up. So I think it's very similar in value. But the difference is that defensive tackle is deeper. So if you're going to pick one high, he has to be really good because it's a position that's easy to find in the later rounds, like we've seen with the Jets in recent years with guys like Shepard, Fatukasi. So he's got to be really good to be worth that pick, and he definitely has the talent to do so. He showed it down the stretch last season and in flashes throughout the year. So the pass rushing, that's the phase where he's got to really improve. In the last 4 games, he definitely was a much improved player than he was over his first 9 games. So hopefully he is able to do that, and he doesn't have to put up 10 sacks. He doesn't even have to put up 8 sacks. I know that's what everyone likes to look at, but it's about pressure. That is what is most important. Sacks are so rare that it's just, you can't evaluate a player based on a handful of sacks in a season, whereas his ability to create pressure matters on every single snap throughout the season. So if he can ramp up his pressure to a top 10 to top 15 rate, that's where you want to see him be. And the way he was playing down the stretch last season, I definitely think he's capable of doing it. So to see him, just like Mekhi Becton, Quinnen Williams getting positive hype in training camp is a really positive thing because he's one of the biggest X factors on this team. If they're going to create pressure defensively, then it's going to have to start with Quinnen Williams, considering the lack of talent on the edge. So very promising to see him getting some positive hype.
Last question, I guess, as we've gone through these players. If Quinnen Williams has the season that you expect he may have this season, or maybe the season that you want, doesn't have to be Hall of Fame, Pro Bowl level in year 2, but a very good season, creating a lot of pressures, maybe getting 5 or 6 sacks, and dominant in the run game. Where do you think this Greg Williams defense places without Jamal Adams? No CJ Mosley. I guess they didn't have Mosley last year. They get Avery Williamson back. I think their corners are probably overall better, but still a big question mark. And the big question mark is on the edge. Defensive line, as you said, I think most teams feel like they have a good defensive line. I think that's a really good point you made. And the Jets have a lot of, I guess, smaller names in the defensive line than they may be used to. Quinnen is the guy that stands out to the average NFL fan, but Steve McClendon's probably one of the most underrated players in the league, let alone on the team. Guys like Folo Fatukasi and Nathan Shepard both had great years last year. And even a guy like Kyle Phillips, and we've talked about getting John Franklin Myers back, who didn't play at all last year, but did show some promise with the Rams in 2018. Where do you think this defense places under Greg Williams? Do you think they're going to go up from last year, or do you think they're going to go down in terms of scoring defense, which they were middle of the league? I think they were 16th in scoring defense, but in defensive yards, I believe they were around the 10 mark, 11 or 10. So, Michael, where do you think this defense places?
Yeah, they were 10th in DVOA last year, which was really impressive considering the injuries. But Adams and Mosley definitely shakes it up quite a bit. Even though they don't play what you would consider premium positions, you're still taking a big drop-off in talent from Adams to Bradley McDougald. And McDougald is a very solid replacement, but that's still quite a big drop-off from a guy who's probably the best player in the league at his position to a guy who's an above-average starter. And then at linebackers, where it's a little more important, you're going from Mosley to a combination of guys who had the Jets linebacker group as one of the worst in the league last year in terms of various factors, passer rating allowed, missed tackles, and all the guys who are a part of that are back and probably are going to be combining to fill in for Mosley. But you do get Avery Williamson back. That's important. But other than that, it's going to have to come down for them to improve or even maintain that ranking. And also with Mosley, it is important to realize that they didn't have him last year anyway, but it was going to be he definitely would have raised the ceiling quite a bit. But for them to make up for the loss of those 2 guys and be able to either maintain or beat that ranking from last year, it's going to come down to internal progression. Quinnen Williams, who we just talked about, can he take a big step up? At cornerback, can Bless Austin give you 16 games of what he gave you? The first 4 games he played last year were really solid. He cooled off a little bit after that, got benched, but he was a rookie who had not even practiced until October, had come off of 2 ACL surgeries. So what he did was so impressive. If Bless Austin can develop into a star, that would be absolutely massive. And then at the edge, is someone going to step up and do anything? You mentioned in our last podcast, Terrell Basham as your pick for surprise player. If he can do that, that would be massive. Is Jordan Jenkins ever going to take a step up from just being an okay rusher? That would be huge. Bryce Huff, is he going to do anything? Is Jabari Zuniga going to contribute as a rookie? None of those edge rushing prospects are promising, but if someone can do it, it would be huge. But it's going to come down to progression if they're going to improve, because they they did not improve on paper off of last year. They would have if they still had Mosley coming back, coupled with Avery Williamson, and still had Adams. But with those two stars gone, it's definitely on paper a worse defense than it was last year, but it can be better because what you have in terms of youth with Quinnen Williams, Nathan Shepard as well. Can he become a top-tier pass-rushing defensive tackle? What Shepard's done on a per-snap basis with pressure gives the promise that he can be a really, really good pass-rushing tackle. Can he do that? And then bless Austin the outside. So it will come down to progression.
Right.
But overall, I think that the loss of Mosley and Adams is definitely going to knock them down a little bit. This is still going to be, I think they'll be right around average, somewhere in that 18 to 14 range. This is still going to be a great run defense. And then in coverage, I think you still have a very solid safety duo with May and Bradley McDougald. Avery Williamson's going to help out there a little bit, and he'll also help out in run defense, mitigating the loss of Jamal Adams. So this should be a top 5 run defense. In coverage, it should be slightly below average. You know, you're helped out by your safeties, but hurt by the corners. And overall, it should be about average. But the potential is there to be better if you can get Quinnen and Bless Austin, particularly those two guys, to have big breakouts.
Right. I think the biggest thing that you mentioned there is the lack of an edge presence. And I think this past offseason, Joe Douglas really focused on rebuilding the offensive line. And obviously next offseason, he's going to continue rebuilding the offensive line. He's going to go focus on getting Sam Darnold more weapons. I think that's going to be the primary objective on offense. But I would say his probably number one objective is going to be getting edge talent, getting after the quarterback, because he recognizes to win in this league, and I've said it 1,000 times, but you got to protect the quarterback and you have to get after the opposing team's quarterback. So he's started the rebuild on protecting Sam, but he hasn't really done much on getting after the other quarterback. So I think next offseason you're going to see him fill out that offensive line, bring in Sam some weapons, and then really go all out trying to build that front seven. And he'll probably throw in a corner there as well, but that edge position is really where he's going to look. It wouldn't surprise me if the Jets had 3 new edge players between free agency and early round draft picks. Before we wrap up, a little bit of breaking news here. I guess not by the time you're listening to this, but Vincent Smith is going to be out 5 to 8 weeks with a core muscle surgery he's going to have. I guess it's better than missing the entire season. But he should be back within the first month of the season. But yeah, he could miss weeks 3 and weeks 4 or whatever. So maybe that makes sense.
And that definitely means that Chris Hogan's going to be out there playing some pretty meaningful snaps.
Yeah, that explains the signing. It's a bit of a bummer because I think some people were expecting a big season from Vincent Smith as kind of a sleeper pick. But he will return this season, so hopefully he can display his talent in the mid part of the season and towards the end. But that's going to do it for our first edition of this training camp CYJ pod. I'm sure we'll be doing plenty more. We have some stuff planned. We'll do a mailbag again soon and some other things. But kind of like this format, breaking down some training camp studs over the first few days. I'm sure there'll be plenty more training camp sweethearts as we continue on. I think we're 4 weeks away from week 1, so it's quite close. It's weird with no preseason games, but we'll see how the Jets can replicate that in practice. I wonder if we will get some pretty intense practice sessions. I think the full pads go on, if not tomorrow, the next day. They did start with the uppers, which is just shoulder pads and no knee pads or anything. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, it seems like the first day was the worst day. Yesterday was great, and today was another solid day. So just going to keep building, especially with that offensive line. Just got to get that chemistry developed and fast because Sam Darnold and Le'Veon Bell desperately need help from their front 5. You can follow us at CYJ Pod on Twitter. You can follow myself at Ben W. Blessington, Michael at Michael_Nania. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. JetsXFactor.com. We're also there. It's the best place to go for Jets content. Make sure you check that out. We're on the Jets X Factor YouTube as well. So go subscribe there. We post all our episodes there. And I think that's it for all the plugs. Michael, any last words before we wrap this up?
I actually do have one more thing to say, and it's about Quinnen Williams. I just want to say, try not to look at just sacks. It doesn't tell you everything. Fletcher Cox, he's averaged 6 sacks per season in his career. Akeem Hicks, he's usually around 7. Grady Jarrett has averaged about 5 or 6. And these guys are absolute game wreckers, and their sack numbers aren't ridiculous. So Pay attention to what he's doing on the field. Don't just look at the sack column. It's about pressure.
Well, can I say one thing, though? I guess now that you opened that can of worms, wouldn't that be the same case with Leonard Williams?
I think Leonard Williams is a good, underrated player. I'm not a Leonard Williams critic. I think he was I think Jets fans massively underrated him.
So do you think the value of a 3rd and 5 then was not as great as a lot of Jets fans thought it was? Do you think the Jets would be a better defense with him? I mean, when you look at the money he's demanding, I really don't feel like felt like the defense actually got better when the Jets lost Leonard Williams. And I understand that he is always towards the top of the league with his pressure rate, but it's his sacks that never really, matriculated.
Well, I think it was a good value because of the contract and how much talent they have there. Although at that point we didn't really know about Shepard or Fadakasi, but I guess because from a contract team building standpoint, that made perfect sense. But I do think the Jets would be have substantially more upside if they had Leonard Williams. If you had him and Quinnen next to each other right now, and I know it didn't look like it when they were together last season, but I do think there'd be more upside. But to be fair, though, that was the stretch that Leo had the first half of last season was easily the worst of his career, and he was a lot better when he went to the Giants. If you watch that Giants game against the Jets last year, Leo was in Darnold's face constantly throughout that game. He got a lot better once he was traded to the Giants. I'm not sure what happened with him with the Jets to start last season, but I do stand for Leo. I support him.
All right, well, that will wrap up this episode of CYJ. Bit of an underrated note there by Michael, capping for Leonard Williams. I don't know how to end that, but let's just hope Quinnen Williams is a better player than Leonard. I guess you're right. If he turns out to be Leonard Williams, that's fine. But in my book, I'm hoping for him to be a little bit more impactful than Leo was, because it would seem like Leonard would go 5 or 6 games without ever hearing his name, and then he'd make 1 sack on a broken play. And
man, this is just the disconnect here between fans and what really matters. If you really pay attention to Leo every snap, he was doing quite a bit throughout most of his career with the Jets, regardless of what the sack totals say.
Does it sound like I listen to logic, Michael? All right, we'll wrap it up there. I hope everybody's staying well, staying healthy. And we'll be back in the next few days with another Jets training camp update. Maybe a mailbag, we'll see. But everybody stay healthy, stay happy. Go Jets.
Still think the Leo trade was good.
Cuts it back at the 5. Goal line. Sam Darnold did it again. Jones, pressure taken away.
Bradley McDougal.
And he is in for a Jets touchdown. That's over the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown.
There goes Darnold. And Bell! He's doing it all for the Jets.